Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed pleasure to welcome you all for this webinar series, Sevenfold Path to New Normal, organized and presented by the DBA program of University of Kelaniya. Just to mention about the series of webinars, it will feature business leaders from various industries and policymakers of the country. And also, I would like to say that most of them are from the learning partners from the DBA program. And also, I would like to acknowledge the support and guidance from the DBA office, Faculty of Commerce and Management Studies, and Faculty of Graduate Studies of University of Kelaniya. And also, I would like to thank our platform partner, /Tech Labs, and our digital content partner, Luna Labs, which actually they did a wonderful job with short notice. So again, I would like to welcome you all for the webinar, and for today's webinar, which will be the discussion, will be on recalibrating supply chain. So it is all about supply chains today that we are going to discuss. So before I go into the discussion, let me pose a question to you, which you can maybe answer in your mind because of the connect that we have. So let me ask you the question: are you all part of a supply chain? So just I will give you the answer, or maybe you all be thinking, most of you all, yes, or maybe there will be some people thinking, some viewers from the audience thinking no. But the answer is yes, we all are part of supply chains. So I will tell you why I'm saying this, because let me give an example of your own home, right? So take the example of the delivery of your gas cylinder to your home. So you are the consumer of the gas cylinder, and also maybe you are the one who was delivering it from the outlet to your home. So you were a part of the supply chain of this supply of gas, and so therefore you are part of it at the end of the supply chain. And if you are a, let's say if you are a farmer where you are cultivating something, the produce you have to sell, then you are the starting point of the supply chain. So that is to elaborate to you that we all are partners or part of the supply chains. So that is why it is very important to talk about this. Now I will ask you another question, whether the supply chains that we talked about, is these supply chains disrupted? So I think I am sure most of you all, or even 100% of your the people will have the answer yes in mind. So actually the supply chains are disrupted. That is why we are discussing about the disruption of supply chains and how to overcome in the short term, and also to how to recalibrate these supply chains into the future. And also now we talked about the supply chains which is around our homes. Now let me again tell you, it is not only that. Now there are so many factories, so many companies which are stopped right now. Either they are not doing production because they are not having raw materials, or they have limited capacity to run. Some machines are broken and they can't get the parts in, or maybe even some of the companies are having the raw materials at the port, but they can't get that raw material into their factory, or can be the other way around. They all have all the capacity, but they don't have orders to serve. So both the supply and demand side is impacted, and that is creating a huge problem, not only in Sri Lanka, because you would have heard from media that even the big conglomerates like Apple, Samsung, Hyundai, Nissan, all these companies had to stop production for maybe even for few days. So it is a very huge disruption that we are seeing in supply chains, from the very small supply chain starting from our home or the backyard, and to the biggest conglomerates in the world, which are huge and having so much of operations across the world. So that is the reason why we are trying to discuss today how to face this situation in the short term, as well as how do we cater to supply chain recalibration to face this kind of a situation into the future. So to discuss this supply chain recalibration, we have a very distinguished panel with us who is joining with me. So therefore, I would like to firstly introduce my distinguished panel. So firstly, I would introduce Mr. Tusit Gunavarna Surya, who is the Procurement and Logistics Director of INSEE Cement. And then also I would like to welcome and introduce Mr. Dhananjay Ponnamperuma, who is the Chief Technological Officer of Hutchison Telecom. And also I would have the privilege of introducing Mrs. Gayanidi Alvis, the Chairperson of Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, and also the founding Chairperson of Women in Logistics and Transport. And finally, we have our own Mr. Shaminda Samaravira, who is the Chief Financial Officer of Sri Lankan Airlines. So welcome you all to this webinar, and thank you all for joining us. So what I will do is just explain how we will conduct this program. So I am Rusiri Vijayaratna, who will be moderating this discussion. So how we will do this is, now we have discussed about the supply chain and the disruptions that in general, I told you about the disruptions that are faced across the world. But now we will hear from and we will ask from this elite panel how they are seeing these disruptions. So I will just first move to Tusit and ask about Tusit. So what are the impacts that we are facing due to this COVID-19 in specific to supply chains according to your views? Over to you, Tusit.
Thank you, Rosary. Can you hear me? Good evening, Rosary, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So the core essence of a supply chain is to match the demand and supply. And supply chain contributes a lot to the bottom line of a company or the profitability. Therefore, a disruption in the supply chain can have very significant economic and social impacts. So what we see today is exactly that. Now, disruptions are not very uncommon to a supply chain. It can be due to a natural disaster like the tsunami that happened in Southeast Asia. It impacted Sri Lanka as well. It can be even floods, which happens once in a while in Sri Lanka, in India, in Bangladesh, in other countries. Or it can be an industrial accident like what happened in Chernobyl or with the BASF factory, which have significant disruption across the supply chain. But what we see today due to COVID-19 pandemic and the disruption that's caused by that is unprecedented. And when we look at why that's happening, there are three main characteristics that you can see that's causing this unprecedented scale of disruption in global supply chain. First is the scale of the disruption. It started in Wuhan in China, it spread across to some Southeast Asian countries like Korea, and then went into Italy, spread across Europe, went to US and came to Africa. So the scale is truly global. Entire world and its supply chain is disrupted. Secondly, the duration. Usually you would see a supply chain being disrupted for a week or two, even case of a natural disaster or even an industrial accident, industrial trade union action. All these are rather short-lived compared to the disruptions that we face today. So we have seen it started in November in China and now it's almost 6 months, and each country seems to be going through at least a 3 to 4 month cycle in disruptions. And thirdly, it is also how it is impacting the entire world due to the fact that it's very difficult to predict. even in case of a natural disaster or an accident, you would have some sense as to when you can get back to the norm. Here, what we are talking is that we will not probably get back to the norm, but that there will be a new norm. So because the COVID impact and how this virus is acting is changing day to day. We personally would have experienced that from beginning of April, government was planning to take curfew off, and then on Sunday we hear that it is extended for another week or so. So those three characteristics create a unique scenario, an unprecedented supply chain disruption across the globe. Now, this is impacting the entire supply chain in the sense when we talk about supply chains, we talk about four functions: planning, sourcing, making, and delivering. So all four functions in this case are disrupted at various points and to various issues. Now, when you look at the effect that is caused by this, you can clearly see that this is causing supply shocks as well as demand shocks. First, if you look at the supply shocks, it's affecting the people. So there's a people shock, which is affecting both the manufacturing industry and the service industry, because people are unable to report to work, or either due to social distancing and other things, there are certain things they cannot perform as normal. Secondly, there are material shocks, which is mostly affecting the manufacturing sectors. This can be due to closure of regular suppliers in China, India, or Europe, or even local suppliers because of curfew. And it also can be because of freight restrictions. Now, you would have experienced the difficulties in container shipping and even air freight. And even when the container comes, the difficulty of clearing and taking the goods due to the limited access to Sri Lanka Customs Port Authority and the additional expenditure that you incur. So truly it's causing supply disruptions, supply shocks. And when you look at the demand side, you can see that demand is also disrupted, and it is disrupted, and there are different shocks across different industries. Now, industries like airlines, hospitality industry, tourism, they see almost zero demand. But if you look at the medical supplies industry, or if you look at online retailing industry, there's a peak demand that they have to cater. So demand is also facing major shocks. Now, when we look at how to adapt to this situation and how to come out of this, we need to figure out whether this demand and supply shocks are transitory or permanent shocks. Transitory being that the demand or the purchase will be just delayed. It's not happening either due to lockdown or curfew, but when it becomes lifted, the demand will be there. Permanent demand shocks will be because if people lose their jobs because of this pandemic, and if they lose the income, there may not be a demand for certain items. For example, automobile, luxury items. There may not be demand for a certain time. So it will be a permanent demand loss. So in the next round, when we come to discuss how to come out of this, it's important to identify what exactly is the scenario that you are facing. Proceed over to you.
Yes, thank you, Tusit. So the point that I have picked from what you have said is like the demand and supply both are interrupted together, which is a very unique situation. And also I would like to note what you said about the COVID-19, the way it kind of moved from one cluster to the other. So it's in a way, a unique pandemic that we are facing, and we should be very much prepared to act on it, because it's a kind of a unique situation that is presented to us than the previous disruptions that we experienced. So now I would like to move to Dhananjay to ask, okay, being a technology person, how is Dhananjay, this is impacting the communication, the information flow, the mobility? I would like to take your views about that. Over to you, Dhananjay.
Yeah, thanks, Rusiru. Rusiru started the event by discussing the disruptions. In most of our companies, we have something called the business continuity plan, or the BCP as we call it. I would say that this would be the ultimate test of our BCP, and I'm sure most of us were unprepared for this. The effect of the pandemic is so much so unprecedented and unplanned for. We see different industries are affected differently. For example, if you look at industries like hospitality, restaurants, spas, or salons, it's virtually non-existent compared to what we had pre-COVID. On the other hand, essential food, medicine, and even telcos are of very heavy demand. Each industry is faced with a unique set of challenges. Let's take the telecommunication industry, for example. People are confined to their homes, and they have most of them are fully on YouTube, on Netflix, on Facebook, and even working from home. Now, today I had about 6 hours of meetings, and I just checked the data consumption I had. I had consumed 1.5 GB of data. That means during this month, I will use 40 GB of extra data, which I would have not used if I was not working from home. It is more than my total monthly package. So what we need to see in any industry is how capable are we to match the supply and demand, and whether the supply chain itself is robust enough to get the act together. To understand the challenges, we need to look at both upstream, that means the supplier side, as well as the downstream, which is the customer side. But more or less, the challenges are probably the same. No matter how trivial we think they might be, the immediate disruption comes from the obvious challenges. Things like lack of laptops or IT infrastructure to work remotely. One of my friends told me in their company, they lost a big business simply because the legal officer didn't have a laptop to finalize some documents. Because it was done in such a short notice, the social distancing, they could not give her a laptop. Then it might be expertise in using systems, connectivity issues, some people might not have internet access properly, and payment issues with suppliers to customers. And of course, not having proper systems to facilitate the processes to keep on moving remotely, like probably ERP. The bigger problem, however, is the challenge doesn't stop you there. It applies to both upstream and downstream, as well as the extended supply chain. What if our suppliers are not equipped to communicate and work same as before? What if the customers cannot accept the services or goods or pay for it? So this is one side of the picture I see. The second side of the picture obviously comes from safety. It is of paramount importance now. How can we ensure the service is delivered to the customer without compromising the safety of our own staff as well as the safety of the customer? And would the customer trust us? On the other hand, how transparent is our supplier in their quality control measures and production and delivery? Basically, can we trust them to be safe? So the challenges also come from whether we can assure safety and of course monitor it remotely. So Resiru, basically I can sum up the immediate challenges of the supply chain due to two main reasons. The first one is the unprecedented and unpreparedness to continue remote operations due to restriction of mobility. And secondly, safety and health assurance and how to monitor it remotely. So the restriction of mobility and importance of health would probably give you the immediate challenges, Rusiru. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Dhananjay. So if I pick the points that Dhananjay was highlighting, I think he was saying that it is important to know the differences that most of the industries have there because of their nature of the industry, and also the mobility which was Dhananjay highlighting, and the communication. So the information flow actually is a critical part of the supply chain, and I also can share example. Nowadays we do have a lot of orders we are putting for deliveries, and what I experience is most of these people who are kind of having these services don't communicate. I mean, if they can't deliver, they don't even send a SMS or a WhatsApp message saying we can't deliver, or this is the date that we will deliver. So the customer experience, the customer service levels are actually suffering because of this. So it is a very simple communication. And Dhananjay was telling about a laptop, right? So this is which we are talking is not even a laptop. You have the phone, you can do a text message. But since this importance of communication or information flow is not, not aware of these parties who are actually trying to understand these supply chains. So therefore, they are actually sometimes maybe at a disadvantage. So the one of the biggest problem is the communication and the information flow, which is very much essential to the supply chain. So now I would like to pick the weaves from Gayani about the current situation, which may be in the local situation as well as the global situation, just to highlight. Over to you, Gayani.
Gayani, your microphone is mute.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Rusiri and the DBS batch of University of Kelaniya for inviting me, and happy to see two of the chartered members of CILT, Rusiri and Tusit, along with me in the panel. I think as the previous two speakers, Tusita and Dhananjay, alluded, I mean, COVID-19 has heightened the importance of supply chain as never before. And like Rusiri asked the question, are we part of a supply chain? And are we disrupted? I mean, it is logistics that has made this invisible virus travel the length and breadth of the whole world and made it a pandemic. I think we are responsible for that to that extent. But having said that, we have a lot of lessons to learn. I mean, we know the virus has really impacted 187 countries and almost to 3.8 million people are infected and 270,000 are fatalities. Back at home, I mean, when I check the figures, we are like almost getting closer to 1,000 mark now, 824 impacted and 9 deaths. Luckily, we have low death rates and recovered 232. And all this has really impacted lives as well as livelihoods. So the governments and the companies and the economies are hugely impacted. So some governments prioritize the livelihoods, some governments prioritize the lives. So if you really look at Sri Lanka, we prioritize lives, I would say. But now I think we realize that we need to also manage the livelihoods, and therefore we are trying to work on it by opening up the economy next week. So coming back, as I always say, for those who don't think supply chain is very important, if there is no supply chain, there is no life on this planet. I'm sure people are convinced now when things are not available for you to consume it, how troublesome it is for all of us. Because when we are almost 53 days working from home now, to be precise, till date, and 45 days kind of 53 days curfew and all that, right? So you need to understand how do you ensure the supply of groceries, the medicine, and various other necessities that the consumers need to their doorsteps. Very important to understand, because when everybody is confined to homes, then it's important not only the goods, but the service aspect has to be ensured. Especially the government must ensure, like no other time, the electricity, the energy, the water, the gas deliveries, all of that has to be there for the people to at least have some sort of a normal life in this heavily disrupted environment that is around us. So actually, I would like to say, although there was so much disruption in our lives, but the service disruption, especially the power and the water, actually to a greater extent was okay, right? We didn't have that much of an issue. So Sri Lanka is a service-based economy. You know, we are 57% of our GDP is based on service. So naturally, we have to wait until something comes from outside. So because of this disruption that happened around the globe, we were hugely impacted because port operations were coming to a standstill at the beginning, and the airports, because we did this in a staggered manner at the beginning after the first case was identified on the 29th of January, and then we had about 6 weeks. And then initially what happened was people started using masks to protect themselves and social distancing to some extent, and the offices and the factories were operating. And people started panic buying and the mask, and normally the mask was around 40 to 50 rupees, and suddenly it went up to 500, that it came to a point that the government had to put price control for that. And in other parts of the world, you saw what happened to the toilet paper. You know, this is the problem that supply chain is always saddled with, and this time it was nothing different, but then that is how we really were disrupted in our country as well. So initially, what happened in the country was logistics and transport and supply chain operations were not considered essential at the beginning. Only on the 28th or 29th of March, it was made an essential service. Until such time, there were a lot of disruption, because we all know at home we were confined and factories couldn't operate, people didn't go, even for you to clear the goods, it was not possible. So all these had a huge impact and a toll on people's lives as well as the companies. So people were not aware as to what they should be doing. But in the meantime, government decided to identify certain items, the essential items, only to be cleared. So HS code 1 to 40 was allowed as essential items, and then that cleared a huge. After a while, other cargo got piled up in the port, and later on, that was also, general cargo was also allowed to be cleared. So when the port was closed, the airport was closed, the cargo import-export movement didn't happen. It was such a chock-a-block that initially people didn't have, some supplies coming to their house because they were confined to homes and they were not allowed to go out. Factories couldn't operate because transport was not available, and if you're not part of essential services, then you're not able to move. So all this create a huge problem in the country. But later on, we will discuss that later, how this disruption slowly emerged, and then how we all got our act together to some extent to minimize this impact and found other ways to manage the disruption and have some sort of normalcy. I wouldn't say it's normal, but brought into the whole supply chain. So I'll stop at this because most of you spoke about it, and later on we'll discuss the rest of the things. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Gayani. So what I hear from Gayani is also about the disruptions that we experience in the ports, the airports, and the disturbance of the macro economy globally and locally. And also we heard from Dhananjay again the disruptions of communication, mobility, and also from Tusit that we heard the disruptions of supply and demand. Now I will move towards Shaminda and ask actually. Now we are hearing all these disruptions. Shaminda, don't you see any opportunity in this disruption that we are having?
Shaminda, your mic is mute.
Thanks, Rusiri. Good evening, everybody. Like what the other speakers also said was, COVID-19 has created such situation we have never seen in our lives previously. The financial disaster in 2008, the SARS and whatnot, the effect of COVID-19 is many folds than that. If you look at it, what really happened was, first it started with Wuhan, then the clusters slowly moved on to Iran, the Italy's to Spain, and now it's in US and can be in Russia also. So this cluster movements has created many of the ports or many of the countries either partial closed down or a fully closed down scenario, which has really disrupted these supply chains. For example, if a goods needs to go to, let's say, US from China, it takes about 42 days on sea freight. But now with these disruptions happening, it will be much more, and the supply chain is basically running out of inventory and all the other aspects. But here, one important aspect that I see is because of some of the players are running out, there are new players also being created in this, like Rusiri had mentioned previously. So what are these new opportunities that has been created? So if you really look at it, medical equipment, personal equipment, and all those things have been newly created, which has much more demand. So there's a big opportunity that is there on getting this stuff into the market as soon as possible. So will sea freight work? I doubt whether sea freight will work at this time. So many of the airlines and all the others are gearing up their cargo facilities, etc., to cater for this newly created demand. It's much more faster, much more flexible, and much more, I would say, adaptable onto the current context. So in this context, even let's take a classic example. Sri Lankan Airlines also has flown to Johannesburg, taking medical supplies, and they are flying to Europe also. So these are new opportunities that are being created by various parties. Look at PicMe, how they have moved along to delivering goods and supplying commodities to households. So these are new opportunities that has been created amidst all this bad impact of the supply chain. Usiri?
Yeah, yes. So if I want to summarize the round one or the discussion that we had on the round one. So what we discussed or what the panelists say was like there are so many disruptions, specifically the demand and supply is disrupted, mobility, communication is disrupted, and on top of it, which is disrupting our own factories or our own entities, the macro environment is also getting disrupted. But I would like to have the view of Shamin, who says like even with these disruptions happening, if you really see, there are a lot of opportunities coming up. And also it's actually the important thing is trying to seize the opportunity. I will again give you an experience that I experienced. For example, now I wanted to get some medicine. And I used to generally go to the pharmacy and get the medicine, and I used to wait in the queue for maybe 1 hour and then take the medicine. But when I now WhatsApp the prescription, I get the medicine in the afternoon or the evening, and I have to only pay a few amount of rupees. So in fact, I was thinking, I mean, with this disruption, there is a lot of opportunity people are creating. So now what we want to move to the next round is trying to understand how we navigate these problems that we talked about and also the opportunities that we talked about. How do we navigate in the short run, and then what can we do? Like what we are trying to discuss is what can we do tomorrow, what can we do next week, and try to weather this situation and move along until we build a resilient supply chain. So I will now move on to the next round. And also I would like to tell the viewers, I see there are a lot of questions coming in. So we will take these questions at the end, right? So thank you very much for the questions. I can see a lot of questions coming in. So now we will move to the next round and I will turn towards Tusit. Now, Tusit, you were explaining this demand and supply disruptions. Now, as a supply chain person, what is the first thing or what is the immediate thing that we can do to navigate through this situation in the current situation? Over to you, Tusit.
Yes, the immediate thing that we need to do is to keep the supply chain going, keep the supply chain flowing. So to do that, we need to ensure in the current context, because of the nature of the pandemic, that the people involved are safe. That's the very first thing that we need to do. So this will include taking certain measures like the adhering to the government health guidelines that's currently out there issued. So for example, washing your hands prior to coming into office, taking care when you use public transportation, etc., etc. So you need to keep your people safe, whether you are in the manufacturing industry or whether you are in the service industry. You need to take additional precautions to keep your people safe. Then secondly, also if you are interacting with a lot of customers, for example, a bank, again, you will need to have these things in place, additional precautionary health measures. Then taking that out of the picture, the first thing that you need to do to ensure that your supply chain is running is to do a risk assessment or a risk mapping of your supply chain. So this will involve judging or forecasting what the immediate demand would be for probably for next couple of months. So this will involve a lot of judgmental calls. It will involve information gathering from the market, from expert panels, etc., etc. So once you have some sense of what the demand is going to be, then you can decide on your next steps. So here, if you are a manufacturing company, you need to be ready for agile productivity, agile manufacturing. Sometimes it could mean shutting down. If you have multiple plants, it could mean shutting down 1 or 2 plants for some time. Then you need to figure out how to redeploy the labor and how to pay them, etc., etc. Then if you are again in manufacturing, then your raw material supply is a thing to think about right now, because Sri Lanka being an import based country, and also even the exports that we have from here are mostly import based. For example, if you look at the apparel industry, we import a lot of fabrics and accessories from China and Southeast Asia, and then we re-export to Europe. So here you need to clearly map out your risks in the material supply. So this can mean talking to your suppliers, finding out what is the impact on them. You can at the moment focus on your tier 1 or your immediate next link in the supply chain, but it will be helpful if you can understand the upstream impact as well, because there can be certain instances where you import some assembly where a component would be missing from your assembly supplier, for example. Then it is needed to prepare for potential channel shifts. Now, we heard few examples. Rusri also gave an example. People may get adapted to new ways of purchasing, new ways of managing supply chains. They might not go back immediately to supermarket shopping because of the health risk. They might continue to order online if it comes to retail. So you need to be adapted to that. Then enhanced focus has to be on labor, because especially for skilled people, if you are shutting down certain plants right now, you need to figure out the strategy, whether you lay them off permanently in this context or whether you maintain them with some scheme in place. Most of the time, when it comes to material supply, there will be scenarios where you will have to go for alternate suppliers. For example, if you are importing some material or some component from China, it might be worthwhile, if you are not able to get that further, to look at a different province in China, because China being so vast, there are several industrial districts. So if one supply is not working, one factory is not working, there's a good likelihood that there will be an alternative available. Similarly, if you look at India, it's a vast country, potential to look at alternative suppliers. Then the logistics, both inbound and outbound. As you know, a lot of airlines are not operating right now. You need to relook at the risk. Currently, most of our inbound logistics as well as outbound logistics were based on ocean freight. You might need to review that, looking at how both the shipping lines and airlines are behaving, also taking into the cost into account. Then, while we do that, and while we have a good risk map of the supply chain, you will be able to decide what exactly is best. And in these circumstances, you need to remember that it is accepted that there will be trade-offs. In certain cases, you might have to decide which product to produce if there's a limitation in a certain raw material. You might have to decide which customer to serve if you are unable to serve all the customers. So how you make that decision, your decision matrix for the trade-off, depends on the organization. And there are few specific things that you need to watch out for in a context like this, in a situation like this. For example, due to short supply of labor or materials, certain suppliers at this time can supply you substandard goods. For example, packaging materials. If a certain glue is not available, they might do it with whatever that is available and supply to you. So your supply chain runs into risk. So this is one of the things that you need to watch out for. Secondly, additional expenses that you incur. For example, it can be port damages, it can be other penalties. So you need to clearly review your supply contracts with your supply partners and understand where you can declare force majeure, where you can exit from minimum commitments, things like that. The key thing in this context is to watch out for cash, which is working capital, and to see how you can optimize cost. And the other panelists will talk about these aspects in continuing the supply chain during this difficult time. Proceed, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Tusit. Actually, I think you gave a lot of hints and small actions that people can take to immediately counter this situation. So I will not actually go into again repeating those, but what I picked from your to say is like two things that I picked. First thing is that mapping of the supply chain. We need to know exactly who is the supplier, from where it is coming, in what product it is used. So the understanding of the supply chain, and then only we can prioritize. So I think these are the two key points I am taking from you. I know you talked about a lot of other measures that people can take. So I will not repeat it in the interest of time. Now, what I will do is now we need to prioritize, we need to map out the supply chain. So how I want to move to Dhananjay, how he will see what are the measures that immediately supply chains or the people or the supply chain managers can take to counter this situation. Dhananjay, over to you.
Yeah, Rusiru, first of all, one of the most important things I need to highlight is everyone needs to swim in their own lanes and not swim in others' lanes. What do I mean by that? Well, each one of us are experts in our own domains. Let's say supply chain people are experts in supply chain, finance people in finance, for example. Right? So the supply chain needs to take the decisions on supply chain for the time being at least. Usually there are very tough governance structures around supply chain, especially procurement, and of course all that is for good reason. However, we need to be very resilient and adaptive as well, because every hour is important for us. The management needs to judge in which moment where they can bend the processes during this crisis response time. For example, I would take a quality team, quality control team. They might have to do extra OT hours to ensure the safety precautions are fully met, probably more than before. So they should not go through a tough task of justifying the extra OT hours to finance and HR. A simple example, but these kind of things do happen in our industries. Of course, having said that, the respective decision maker needs to be accountable for their own decisions. From a technology point of view, you obviously can't immediately switch on to ERPs or wouldn't be immediately able to digitize your information. So the second point I would like to highlight is the approach of forming kind of task forces rather than working in our usual hierarchical old structure. Selected working level members can act as emergency virtual operation centers, so they can form a team and form this virtual task force for others to rely on to get help, obtain IT related help, arranging curfew passes and transport when needed, procuring immediate requirements like laptops to work from home, facilitating work from home, and even escalating problems through a central point to a higher management. The third is to work with the extended supply chain and quickly understand the readiness of your key suppliers and customers to work remotely. You might be able to work remotely, but your supplier or your supplier's supplier might not be able to work remotely, and similar applies to your customer. So you might need to adapt into their ways, or you might need to help them to adapt into yours. You need to be a bit more flexible in this kind of an environment, not going just by the book or by the processes. So you need to go out of the way and ensure that the extended supply chain is ready to deliver in this crisis time, not just your supply chain. So basically, to sum up the immediate actions, I would say let the experts take the decisions in their own fields, and might have to bend the processes a little bit until we are in a stable mode of operation. We have to form immediate emergency virtual operation centers rather than allowing to work in the traditional structured methods, and work closely with the extended supply chain and either adapt to theirs or try to help them to adapt to ours. So this would be the immediate action we can take on from a technological as well as a non-technological viewpoint. Rusiru, over to you.
Thank you, Dhananjay. I think I like the word that you, I mean, the phrase that you are using, swim in your lane. I think that is quite applicable because in the situation that we are in, we can't afford to like create a lot of other jobs wasting time. So we should allow the people to take their own decisions and move on, of course, with accountability and a central control in hand. So I think that is one of the key points that I would like to highlight. And also, Dhananjay mentioned a lot of other things, having a control center, having accountable task forces. I mean, these can be applicable to even a small grocery shop, small pharmacy, everywhere. It need not to be a big factory or a big workplace. You can apply these things. I mean, in a grocery also, you can assign tasks to various people to do whatever the task that they do. So likewise, you can simplify and do these tasks in this kind of situation. So now I will move to Gayani to understand from her. Basically, she was talking about people also in the last session. So what is the kind of measures that we can take, Gayani, in this kind of situation?
Okay, I think some of it has been addressed by the previous two speakers, but nevertheless, things that that I will touch upon so that we don't repeat. I think the first thing I would say we have to first look at, if you are the chief executive officer or the top management person in the company, is to see whether your team is affected, right? So I think Susi also mentioned about that. But I think if they are not impacted, if they are impacted, then you need to ensure the whatever the support that you need to extend from the company. But if not, you need to make sure that when the office or the factory is going to resume, who should be coming to work and who should be staying at home and working. Because the government has clearly given guidelines, only 1/3 of the workforce should be coming to work. So this has to be done in a phased out, staggered manner. Because if you try to expedite this and work fast, and then we might get into other problems and infect your factory operational people. So therefore, first we have to do your homework. So you might want maybe the chief executive officer. I read somewhere somebody said chief encouragement officer. CEO should be encouragement officer this in a time like this. So you have to keep your enthusiasm with you going, as well as you need to ensure the team is motivated. So you have to get your team together and get them to really map out from where your people are coming from, because most of them may have gone to their villages, because some of the people who are in rented accommodation or boarding houses, they were not allowed to stay there. And maybe some of them are in highly populated area where clusters we have been found recently. So you need to first gauge the situation, whether all of them or some of them, and the risk. While you're looking at the supply chain risk assessment, you need to also look at the people supply chain risk assessment as well, because that is important, because finally they drive the supply chain. So therefore, once you understand where the risks potential is, then you will take actions in order to manage that. Then the next step is, once you understand and get the situation, then you may get the people to come to work on their own. But sometimes, depending on the criticality of the operation, you might want to provide transport to them to ensure the safety of that. Sometimes you might have to find accommodation for these workforce members, especially the blue-collar workers, to stay in a particular place rather than going back and forth to their houses. They may be there for a week or so, and then a few days or so, and provide the necessary infrastructure facilities for them to operate, so that the disruption can be minimized for your factory operation. Okay, this will involve cost, but you need to figure out the way the pros and cons and see the impact to the company operation and see how it is. On the other hand, once you understand all that, like Tusik mentioned, we need to make sure the hygiene and sanitary conditions as governed by the government, and also you should go the extra mile depending on the requirement of your own operation to understand how it has to be done. While doing so, you must also keep checking any new developments that is going to happen. So you should be ready for that. Like Dhananjay mentioned, I also would like to have two teams. Firstly, the one team to really look at the immediate challenges, because you will have to be like a SWAT team. Things might emerge without your knowledge. So you might have to have different task forces to really look at various aspects in the organization, maybe disruption to the supply side, the demand side, or the factory operation, or the whole works. Like the government is having a task force and centrally looking at all that with different people. Then I think you must at the same time look at the future as well. Maybe you may not see beyond 3 to 6 months at the moment, but you need to also look at the future, how it will be, how it will pan out, and what is it that you should do now in order to minimize the further disruption that is happening to your company. So all this is important to understand, and at the same time, if you have any excess capacity, because by now some of the companies, especially in the apparel sectors, customers are asking them to give extended credit, or they would have deferred the orders, and especially in the UK and the EU, they said spring and summer all orders have been cancelled. So it's going to be a huge burden on some of the businesses in Sri Lanka, especially because we have gone and put our eggs into one basket in the US and the EU space, in the downstream side of supply chain. In the upstream supply chain, almost all the stuff that we import are coming from the China. So now we have to look at China plus one strategy as well, because 80% of our APIs for the pharmaceutical industry is coming from there. Now pharmaceuticals is high in demand, but we have a huge problem. Have we looked at alternative sources while this problem is emerging? Have we done that? So it's important to understand. So everybody has to really pay attention to detail. I would say if you are a CFO, I'm sure that Dhananjay must be doing that. Sorry, not Dhananjay. Yeah. So I'm sure he must be doing that, because you have to be, chief follow-up officer. Sometimes some people say CFO should be following up with a fine-tooth comb, because you can't delegate that responsibility to somebody, because there is so much at stake in the current crisis situation. So how would you then manage that? So I'll stop at that and ask the other speaker to speak. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Gayani. I think so. Gayani spoke about this having two teams for the short term and the long term. I think that is a good point, because while we are working and trying to get these disruptions sorted out, we should think of the future. In fact, that is what we are going to speak about the next round. But now, as Tusit or Dhananjay or even Gayani mentioned, now for doing all these things, there is a cost to doing it. So as Gayani also mentioned, I would like to ask Shaminder, how do you manage this cost? How do you kind of take this cost? Because there are certain costs coming in, and at this stage of time where even the cash flows are tight. Over to you, Shaminder.
I think some valid points have been raised also in a practical scenario. With revenues drying up like drastically or close to near zero in many industries, there are many cost escalations also coming. So here important thing is we need to protect our cash in the current context, like what they say is cash is king. So here, what are the aspects that we can slowly work on from a supply chain perspective, and a future readiness perspective is very important. So from how can we survive the current crisis through basically preserving our cash. So I would say we need to look at our working capital in a much more stringent manner. Can we collect the receivables or the debts that we owe much more faster? Can we have a bit more extended credit terms with our suppliers, have a discussion with them, develop a good, depending on our rapport, can we extend the credit terms? Can we provide a bit of LC facility and go much more extended LC terms? So they also have some guarantees at a slightly higher cost. So, and also we need to critically look at our inventory also, because as you know, if you look at the bullwhip effect, etc., everybody will be reducing the inventory going forward. And therefore, do we really want to stack so much of inventory, or can we reduce our production also? rather than stacking it up so much. So these are some of the aspects the manufacturing companies, the service companies, upstream and downstream can really look at to bring, I would say, some control on the cost or the cash flow aspect. Next, so once we are, and one important aspect that we need to play out is we never know when these curves will be coming to normal. So as per WHO and many of the gurus, they talk about U curve and a V curve. So depending on the recovery time period, these curves may change. So we are playing, I would say, on a moving time scale. Accordingly, cash flows should be done on a weekly basis, monthly basis, on a very granular level to see what we can go along. Another aspect that I would like to touch here is we need to open up all of our agreements at this moment, because one important thing here is the post-COVID world will be very different from the pre-COVID world. Customers' demands will be much more different. Their lifestyles will be much more different. Take the example what Rusuru said. He's going to order online through pharmacies, etc. We will do the same. Will we go back to the supermarkets again? I don't know. So we may be ordering online. So the post-COVID world will be totally different. So are we ready internally as companies also? And so therefore we need to relook at all our agreements and relook at what are the facts that are there in the agreements, and to make it future ready is one of the key aspects that we will need to look at. Also, like, there will be a significant demand in sanitization cost, personnel, etc., etc. So then will the manufacturing companies geared up to manufacture them? So there should be new investments coming along for future readiness. So these also should be clearly looked into and closely monitored and do the right investment so that we are future ready. Otherwise, we will lose the curves as we have seen in many of the previous examples. So important thing is it's not just cost cutting or basically, so I would rather say it's a cost optimization strategy where we slowly remove the fat, unnecessary fat in the organization, preserve the working capital that we have or the cash that we have, because we don't know what are the timelines of coming to normal, and then we need to invest at the right places.
Yeah, thank you, Shaminder. I think what you said, you said a lot of mitigation ways of doing it, opening up agreements and few other methods of doing it. But I would like to kind of take the point that optimizing cost, because I think all of us are now gunning to cut the cost. And I would like to take the line that you were saying, take out the fat. So basically what we need to do is take out the fat and rationalize the cost. And also you were mentioning that sometimes we need to invest in certain areas where you need to be prepared to take up the new challenges. So therefore, I think all that things is entailing in change. So in the next round, what we will do is we will try to discuss how, now what we discuss in this round is how to mitigate, how to take immediate action, so how to control the situation and weather the situation. So in the next round, which is the final round, now we will discuss from our panel members, how do we now recalibrate or reconfigure our supply chains? What are the strategies that we will adopt to face this kind of a disruption into the future? Because this is a disruption, as most of you all told, is a very unique one, which we have never faced maybe for the last 100 years. So how are we going to build resilient supply chains by adapting different strategies? So I would like to move to Tusit. What kind of strategies that we will be adapting into as the preparation for a new supply chain or a recalibrated supply chain? Over to you, Tusit.
Yes, Rizru, if you look at the last few decades as supply chain professionals, we spoke about minimizing cost, reducing inventories, and then things like improving working capital, driving up asset utilization, etc. So the disruption caused by COVID pandemic has given us an opportunity to rethink how we want to manage our supply chains. I do not think that it warrants a total 180-degree transformation of supply chain, but still there are a few things that we will need to do. Firstly, if you look at it as a country, as Sri Lanka, I think it gives us opportunities in two directions. Firstly, the domestic supply chain, I think we can further improve value addition, especially agriculture, manufacturing, service industries. There are certain things that we can do locally, and we need to take this opportunity to really drive that. Secondly, due to the geopolitics, you can see certain supply chains moving out of China, or at least trying to move out of China. For example, Japan trying to relocate their factories. US is trying that as well. So that will give opportunities to countries such as India, Vietnam, and we also should be able to get some nodes of this global supply chain into Sri Lanka if the Sri Lankan government is able to have the proper policies and procedures to bring them in here. That's from a national perspective. Secondly, from a business perspective, I see two things that we need to do immediately to take the opportunities from this situation. Firstly, we need to build the capability in demand forecasting. I think that's something that many industries are lacking, whether you are a multinational or whether you are a local company, a small grocery shop, you need to have good capabilities in demand forecasting, because that will ensure that you are able to cater the demand, as well as that you will not be carrying the fat that Shamindra was talking about. So how do you do it? You do it with bottom-up forecasting. You try to increase your S&OP frequency, and thirdly, most importantly, you try to increase the supply chain visibility. And that is where digital supply chain networks come in. So we are talking about Industry 4.0, we are talking about blockchain. Now, all these technologies, thankfully, make the digital supply chain possible, where we can really bring in best practices into our supply chain. So I think that is the opportunity that we need to grab and really drive at this time. Over to you, Russell.
Thank you, Tusif. I think the point that you highlighted on the forecasting capability, I think is a very valid point, because not only the industries or the big companies trying to improve their S&OP processes and trying to improve the forecasting capabilities, I would say they should be adapting these dynamic forecasting with the external factors taking into consideration, because we used to forecast on our history, internal history and internal events. But I think now what we are facing is totally external events. So we need to build that capability in our forecasting systems. And that applies to even a small, maybe a bakery or a grocery, because now, for example, they need to know at what time the curfew lifts and the curfew is on, because that will depend on their that will depend how much they will sell. So they need to forecast taking into consideration the external event. So I think that's a valid point and a strategy that supply chains should be adapting when they are trying to recalibrate the supply chains. So now also Tusi talked about a lot of digital tools, then adaptation of technology, and so I'll move to the technology person, Dhananjay. What do you think, Dhananjay? How can we enable supply chains using technology?
Yeah, Rusiru, there's a famous meme going on around in social media. I'm sure most of you might have seen. It goes as, who is responsible for digital transformation in your company? Is it your CEO? Is it your CTO? Or is it COVID? Right? I'm sure you must be knowing the answer by now. I see COVID as an unexpected catalyst for technology adoption. Companies should take this opportunity to move along with technology. It could be remote access, online shopping, paperless processes, work from home, and the systems to monitor your entire operation and supply chain. There are some major trends happening in future focused because of this pandemic, and we essentially need to recalibrate our supply chain to fit into those. For the time being, I'll just choose two of them. First would be the customers directly going to suppliers due to the interruption of the supply chain. So even I myself had to order a few tubs of margarine from the company directly because the retailer didn't have it. And in fact, I saw that some of the manufacturers themselves directly go to the customers, bypassing the retail shops and supermarkets to ensure that their products are moving, especially the essential goods. We need to see where we are depending on our industry in this new dynamic. So how can we recalibrate ourselves to fit into this new dynamic? The second I see is enabling ourselves for future technologies. This pandemic showed us the importance of being abreast with future technologies. It might be for our own internal efficiencies, it might be to serve the customer better, faster, and safer, or to keep up with the evolving suppliers. I would say previously perceived technological obstacles or barriers to adoption may no longer be as overwhelming. As technology becomes probably the only accessible or viable alternative for certain services for certain customers. We don't need to start from the most expensive stuff. Progression in technology may be usage of a simple Excel than you doing it manually, or maybe it could be offered by smartphones such as product discovery or mobile payments. It might be an app to track your delivery trucks through the mobiles and see whether they are going to safe zones or not. Then we can slowly move up the ladder. So to close off, I would like to quote a term coined by Sir Arthur C. Clarke back in 1960s, by the way. He told, don't commute, communicate. I would say that this term would sum up probably the whole basis of the new normal. Don't commute, but communicate. And the only way to successfully recalibrate your supply chain is to embrace technological advancements at the best pace you can. It does not need to be a rapid adoption. I'm not saying that we need to jump into technology and do all the fancy stuff at once. Probably you won't have the cash for that. But yes, you need to start from the small step and adopt technology now before it's too late. So Rusiru, we seriously need to get moving on this line of technology adoption. And there are many digital platforms. There are even WhatsApp could be a digital platform. You don't need to go to the fancy ERPs, but start now. Start the digital journey now, because if you don't do it, your customers will do it and your suppliers will do it, and you will be isolated in the supply chain. So to keep abreast, you need to move on with technology. Select wisely according to your industry and your situation. So it's not a global rule, but yes, technological adoption is a must.
Yeah, thank you, Dhananjay. I think I like the quote that you brought in. Don't commute, but communicate. I think, as I told before, also information flow in a supply chain is very important. And also, when you communicate, it reduces commuting. So that under a disruption like that, so it is easy to get into various things without commuting than communicating. So I think that's a good point. And also, you mentioned that when we say technology adaptation or digital enabled supply chains or digital supply networks, it doesn't mean that we have to invest in millions of dollars all the time. It may be required depending on the complexity and the need of the organization. But as you said correctly, it can be the simple WhatsApp platform or the Excel worksheet that we are adapting as a digital or a technology enabler. So I think with that, I will move to Gayani to ask about what Gayani thinks about how to recalibrate supply chains, or what kind of strategies that we can adapt to reconfigure our supply chains.
Yeah, to start with, I'll say in Chinese, crisis means, I mean, the two letters in Chinese, opportunity and the danger. So I think this is a blessing in disguise for all of us, because it gave a huge shock to the whole world. But I think especially for Sri Lanka, a small island nation like Sri Lanka, with whom we are dependent on totally on external world, this is a rude awakening actually. So we need to really understand how we make the most of this situation and try to be self-reliant. Because for the slightest thing, we wait for something to come to our country, and then we have not developed locally. So I think what is important for us is, initially, we must know What are the opportunities we can look at? Now, we have seen in certain companies, the apparel industries in particular, they know now their orders are cancelled or deferred. So they are now looking at, stitching masks or overalls for the health workers. So, I mean, you have to think practically as well. And you see globally, General Motors are producing now ventilators. Now, you cannot just, because your capacity is now idling. What is it that you should do now? And some companies are now looking at on-demand warehousing and on-demand capacity sharing with others. Because we in supply chain, we should decide we compete in the market or on the shelf, not in the supply chain. So we need to understand how should we try to collaborate with even our competition. That is very important to understand, because collaborating at this stage to share capacity, share trucks, share resources that we have will really help us to come out of this crisis situation fast. So that is an opportunity. And on the other hand, consumer behavior is changing. So we really, time will only tell whether the consumers will continue to behave like this. But I have a strong feeling consumers are scared until a vaccine is found. Roche estimation is the vaccine will only come 12 to 18 months down the line. So are we going to stay indoors until that happens? No. We have to really get back and do something for our companies and also for the economy. So to do that, we have to understand how we're going to manage it. Now, those are opportunities that we need to look at. If you look at Sri Lanka, in our country, we import 200 billion rupees worth of food. Our food bill is 200 billion rupees. Our post-harvest loss is 30 to 40%. I mean, just imagine if we can reduce the import bill and do the local agricultural revolution that the government is talking about, rather than using the same way of managing our agricultural manufacturing industry. Can we look at technology usage, precision agriculture, and already some companies are into that. That will be a huge opportunity, because we got a bumper harvest in April. Unfortunately, where the products are required, we are unable to transport and deliver. So, the military has to get involved and intervene and do that. Now, because of the consumer behavior, consumers are scared now. Therefore, consumers want fresh products. Consumers want it to be seen from where it is coming from. So there will be a huge change in the way that the consumers behave. Probably we will continue to buy from the small vendors who are coming to our doorstep. I'll just give you one example. In Panadur area, a friend of mine, actually in that area, in the first 2 months, the first 2 weeks, they didn't have deliveries coming to their areas. So she actually, in her own entrepreneurial spirit, she started a small community around the area, and she developed a website and created a small supply chain in the Panadur area. Now, if you go to that website, dorakadari.com, even yesterday they started delivering Vesak lanterns to the area. So you are linking the small, the timers, the small traders, the bakeries and all of them, and supporting in the community. So there will be shorter supply chains, fresh supply chains, because consumers are changing in that way. Maybe supermarkets, the way people commute to the supermarket to buy things also will change. Supermarkets, they might go for other things. So the huge change will happen. On the other hand, government also has taken various steps to because of the situation, to ensure the spread of the virus. So if you look at the port and the airport, the electronic documentation, the delivery orders and various activities have been initiated now. From the 4th of May, for all import clearances, documentation will be done electronically. So these are little steps that have been taken to prevent. So it is in the right direction. And on top of that, we now continue to use various platforms to work from home. And Zoom, for instance, in December, they had 10 million customers. And because of the crisis, they have increased the customer base to 300 million. Just imagine a crisis like that became an opportunity for them. So how can we in Sri Lanka make use of these trends and the emergent behaviors of the consumers and the various activities that we see around us can be created an opportunity? I think this is the time for us to think, because it is not the survival of the fittest that will win the day. this time. It is the survival of the quickest. So we have to be quick. So therefore, I'll end up my remarks by rephrasing VUCA now, because supply chain will have to have a totally a new way of behaviors. Our behaviors, the ways of working should change. I think we have to repurpose our supply chain. So therefore, my V is values. We have to look at what are the values that we want to propagate. How do we really look at supply chain? What should be the purpose? All that. And we have to really have a good understanding about our supply chain. So our U is understanding. And we have to collaborate. Yes, it is a complex world we have, but we have to collaborate with everybody for our own good. And finally, agility is the order of the day. You have to work fast. You have to quickly be agile in whatever the situation that come our way. And future, how it will pan out, we won't know. So therefore, it is not the big fish who will win the book, as the book says. It's the small fish who can, the fast fish who will really grab the opportunity that you have ahead of you, who will win. So therefore, you see lots of small players coming into this game, to the e-commerce world and all that. So you would see an exciting times of supply chain. It's not the big players, because agility is much more there with the small, fast fish who's in the market, and that's I would like to see, and that's how it will pan out, hopefully. Thank you, Rusli.
Thank you, Gayani. So I think Gayani spoke about a lot of change, and especially about the small fish. That means that small players will be very important into the future. So therefore, it's all about change, that even Tusit Dhananjay was speaking about change. So I would like to turn to Shaminder now. How do we bring about this change in supply chains or businesses? What is the kind of strategy that we will adopt? Shaminder?
Yes, Rusri. On this thing, I will start with a small quote where Leo Tolstoy told, "Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Every disruption comes with its own misery, its own roster of causes, and its own cascade of effects. No two are the same, like what we see. The COVID is not same as the SARS, as well as the financial crisis. But very important thing is the management of every risk involves three aspects. One is prevention, one is detection, and one is the response for the crisis. So how are we going to respond to this crisis is one important factor. We need to look at what our customers, what our customer wants and needs. These are much more, I would say, these have changed drastically on the post-COVID world compared to a pre-COVID world. Look, all of us are in a discussion right now on an electronic media. Previously, we would have done this on a stage, but people are joining and listening, questioning on electronic media. People are working from home, which was never tested in Sri Lanka previously. We have proven we can work from home also. So the new norms are emerging. And similarly in the supply chain aspect also, there are a lot of new norms. Customer demands will be much more different. So the customers will pull various demand aspects accordingly, and the previous supply chain aspects will have to be relooked at drastically. Each stage of the supply chain needs to be looked at, starting from the manufacturer to the retailer to the wholesaler to the retailer to the end customer. Like what Janice said, some parts can be eliminated easily. Let's say the manufacturer can sell directly to the end customer. Things are happening like that at the moment. I have seen many, let's say, food suppliers or food farmers coming and directly selling it to the customers in their own, let's say, tuk-tuks, or basically three-wheelers, or basically demo battas as we call it. So lot of recalibration of the steps will be happening. So as I would say, management of various companies, we need to drastically look at various steps of the supply chain and look at a re-engineering process, because I don't think we as Sri Lankans we have done this for a long time, because like previous financial crises and all those things did not really impact Sri Lanka like what it is there right now. So a relook at your whole processes, a BPR exercise or a re-engineering exercise is paramount to make the supply chain future ready and also to cater for the post-COVID world.
Yeah, thank you, Shaminder. I think basically we need to change. So the supply chain model that we adopt, whether we are a big player or a small player, I think we need to change. And important factors I would highlight from the discussion this round is that, as we discussed, the forecasting capability, building external factors into that, and then using technology wherever it is possible. And I told that it might not be the expensive technology, it can be a very primitive technology, but the information is the important, whether what technology you use, how you use that technology to get the information that you want will be the important task. And also Gaini mentioned about, again, the capacity sharing, the new ways of working, collaborating with even competition. So there are all these are coming for a change. So then Shaminda was explaining virtually how to redesign, how to re-engineer, or rather recalibrate our supply chains and have a new supply chain model in all the companies to face these kind of disruptions in future, because as we told, this is a quite a unique situation that we are facing. So I would like to wrap up the discussion because now we discussed the impacts that we have. We have given a lot of inputs. Our panelists were giving a lot of inputs how to tackle the situation in the short term, short run, and then we discussed how we will strategize, how we will change our supply chain models, what are the main things that we should look at to build resilient supply chains and to recalibrate supply chains. So now I would like to take a few questions and post it to our panelists, because there are a lot of questions coming in. So what I will do is I will pick some questions and try to answer at least a few questions within the time that we have, because we have not, I mean, very little time. So I will just move to one of the questions, which is actually quite popular among the viewers. Now, one question I would like to post this to Gayani. So the question is, as a country, do you think Sri Lanka can get the competitive advantages from this crisis? I mean, not short term, but it can be long term. I think we discussed also about it, but I would like to say a few words from Gayani to that question.
Yeah, obviously, if we play our cards well, if you really look at, before I answer that question, I'll go back to our various competitive rankings that Sri Lanka is in. If you really look at logistics performance indicator, doing business indicators and all that, our ranking is not really up there. So through this situation, by doing this digitization of the government, various agencies and all that, and most organizations are also trying to do things in a more different way and really critically looking at how things has to be done in a more innovative, creative way, will have an opportunity for us to tap into the global supply chains. Especially when the Chinese factories, most of the US and other countries are contemplating bringing the operations from China to India. Obviously, India is our closest neighbor, and our transshipment volumes and all that, when you really look at it, there is a huge opportunity if we play our cards well. So with the Hambantota port and the development of the supply chain infrastructure there, and if you manage the operation well, yes, we can play it, tap into the global supply chains.
Yes, so I think it's correct, because we should tap into other supply chains. We should not look at on our own territory, because India is a huge opportunity that we see that we can tackle on with their supply chains, so that we can link into their supply chains. So I think there is another question, popular question. I would like to post it to Tusit. Will the bullwhip effect strike after the COVID-19?
Yes, Suru. So in this scenario, we spoke about the supply and the demand shocks that we have. So even in a normal scenario, we see how the bullwhip effect, or what supply chains professionals talk about as the distortion in the supply signals along the supply chain. We will definitely see more of that happening. So definitely bullwhip effect will be there, and the way to overcome that is what we spoke about earlier: increasing the visibility in the supply chain and building your demand forecasting capability. So with technology, you can overcome the impact created by the bullwhip effect.
Yeah, thank you, Tusit. I think I would like to add something to that also. Generally, bullwhip effect we are talking about into the generally into the backstream, because when the demand fluctuates, that it goes in a ripple effect to the suppliers, but and also in a positive way. So, but this kind of a pandemic can have even a negative effect. So, if when the demand goes down, it can multiply and go right up to the supplier, and there can be even situations where the supplier has to shut down because he has virtually no demand to supply. So, the bullwhip effect will will come to effect not after COVID-19. Even now we are experiencing, and we have to be very mindful of this bullwhip effect, and the communication or the information flow within the supply chain will be a key aspect to handle this bullwhip effect in the supply chains. So there is another question which I will try to post it to Shaminder. It is regarding the aviation industry. What kind of strategic plan Sri Lankan airline has to execute after reopening the airport with the current situation? So I think I will also add to that to answer. So I mean, I think not only Sri Lankan airlines, there can be a lot of demand surges happening, especially in aviation and tourism industry once this situation is eased out. So how do you think that these organizations should handle these demand surges?
I think it's a very valid and timely question also, because if you really look at it, a lot of our perishable goods and all those things must go out very quickly at this current junction, and there's so much of demand out of Colombo for these perishable goods, such as fish, to fruits, to vegetables in other countries, let's say like European areas and etc. So I would say like what you asked was also, how is Sri Lankan Airlines ready for this? So to give you some insights also, we will help the government, the economy, etc. to kickstart this very quickly. So we have launched a cargo schedule also already, which we are targeting even destinations such as Frankfurt, London, etc. We are connecting the Middle East, we are connecting the Naritas, the Singapores, all those things, the Melbournes, etc. So we have come up with a plan which we have also published also, and on this freighter operation, so we have moved some of our aircrafts into freighters, so then providing ample of space for cargo and quick cargo, so that we can gain some quick advantage, because as I think some of the presenters, I think Gayani and also said that some big players will diminish, new players will come into the picture. So we as a small nation, I would say, should grab these opportunities by both hands, and as the national airlines and as the logistical provider of basically connecting countries, we are ready, and all of y'all in the supply chain can take this opportunity to bring your goods, send your goods out of Colombo, as well as bring it back to Colombo very easily.
Yeah, thank you, Shaminder. I think in the interest of time, I think I can take maybe one more question. This I will pose it to Dhananjay. So the question is how we can develop digital strategies in our organizations to manage supply chain disruptions.
Yeah, that's also a very good question. So, yeah, the question is how can we develop digital strategies in our organizations? I think everybody is quite sure that we need to develop a digital strategy more than ever before. If we haven't thought of it earlier, probably now would be the ideal time to at least start thinking of it. I would say it's probably the same as trying to develop a normal strategy. You need to do the status quo analysis. You need to identify what's out there. You need to understand where you're going, do a SWOT and understand how can you attack your opportunities and threats through your strengths and weaknesses. Probably the only difference of this time towards a difference of the traditional developing strategy would be you need to be very careful in doing a pestle analysis kind of a thing, because traditionally we are looking at a sort of static environment, but this time it is totally a new dynamic. Probably even most companies would not understand what's out there right now because still we have not opened up to the world. So there are very new dynamics coming up. So you need good digital strategists who understand technology, understand customers, and understand how you can deliver that to the customers, as well as how you can liaise with your suppliers very much more than what we had previous. So probably we might have to think of some external people and even some IT experts. Probably earlier a digital strategy could have been built very easily from your own resources, but probably now would be a very tough time to do that because people might not be aware of what's happening out there in this very rapid change. We know that digital technologies, telecommunication, all these are changing very rapidly, but I would say the current rapid pace we are seeing is not probably even thought of before. I mean, who thought we would be working from home 10 hours a day for 1 month? It's like probably never even thought of. So these kind of things also needs to be thought of. I saw one article in South Korea. Now they are aggressively promoting virtual reality for supermarkets. They had it some time before, but yes, we do online ordering. Even now we do online ordering from Kiosk or Apico or wherever. But it's not the same experience like we go into a supermarket. I know I personally like to sometimes go into a supermarket and be in that ambience. A lot of people do that, but we are missing that. But if we can probably think of things like virtual reality, we can give that same experience, at least to a certain amount. So there are very new dynamics which are coming up in the digital world. So developing a digital strategy, you need to, the most important thing here is to understand what are the new digital dynamics. Then only you can develop a digital strategy, unlike all the other strategies here. Over to you, Rusiru.
Thank you, Dhananjay. I think in the interest of time, we have to wrap up the session now. But all the questions, I thank you very much for all the questions that have come in. And I will ensure that all the questions will be answered through email, because we have the names and whoever has posted. So we will try to answer all the questions that has come in. I'm sorry that we couldn't take all the questions because of the time, but I think the time well spent, because we had a very good discussion on the impact that we are having on this COVID-19, the specific to the supply chains, and we touch upon from various levels, from a very high level conglomerate to a small grocery shop or a pharmacy. How does it impact? And then I think panelists, each one in different perspectives, gave various suggestions or actions immediately to take to weather the situation. I think now you will have a very good understanding of what to do tomorrow, what to do next week, how to handle this, what kind of teams we should have, what kind of human resources that we should have. So I think that was given, and then on the final round, we had a very good discussion how to recalibrate and change strategically our supply chain models. And there were very good few inputs like the demand forecasting, enabling the digital supply chains. So, and talked about the people, and also changing the business models or the supply chain model we discussed. So I think we had a very good session on overall the picture of immediate actions, as well as the actions that you should take into the future to be resilient among the supply chains that we will face into the future. So I would like to thank all the panelists for coming in and joining online and contributing towards this valuable knowledge. So I would like to thank again Tusit for coming in, then Dhananjay, Gayani and Shaminda taking part in this webinar and sharing valuable insights and kind of knowledge sharing to all the viewers that are joined in. And also I would like to thank all the people who joined in, the wonderful audience that we had for joining in and also posting questions and be alive with our discussion. And also I would like to thank again the program, DBA program of University of Kelaniya, who was kind of presenting and organizing this event, and also the Faculty of Commerce and Management Studies and Faculty of Graduate Studies in University of Kelaniya. And also I should not forget our platform partner /Tech Labs, who actually gave a wonderful platform to us to operate, and also the digital content partner Luna Labs. Actually, thank you, and you did a great job in very quick notice. And I think I would like to now conclude. And also, again, before concluding, I would like to remind you that now we have unfolded the first of the 7 folds of the path that this entire webinar series will be. So I would urge you to look forward for the next webinar, which will be unfolding in front of you in a different direction, in a different area of discussion. So keep the eyes open, and we will be back soon. Thank you very much for all of you, and good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Good night, everyone, and thank you.
Thank you.